So apparently we are broadcasting. Who knows if anybody's going to watch. So this is the first time doing one of these philosophy chats. We've been hosting some developer chats for the last 6 months or so around one of the metacurrency projects, something called Ceptr. But that mostly gets into how we're building Ceptr and helping other people who are interested in contributing kind of gain familiarity with the project and get onboarded, I guess, a bit. But we realized a little while ago, hey, we should kind of go into the philosophy side and allow people who are not developers to kind of explore some of this stuff with us and help grow our understanding of what it is that we're figuring out and just create a little bit of, we describe it as surface area. Create a little surface area so people can go, hey, what's going on? And ask questions and we can explore kind of together a bit. So to start off with, I can kind of introduce myself and then maybe I'll just ask and see if you have any questions. I'll introduce myself, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, and then we'll go into some questions. So I'm Matthew Schutte. I'm based in San Francisco. I am an entrepreneur, a political philosopher, a privacy advocate, and a big wave surfer. I also have done a fair bit of innovation consulting, collaboration consulting stuff in the past, which is basically just applying the political philosophy stuff to organizations that are willing to pay. That's sort of the gist, right? Hey, we want to know how to make ourselves work better. And then I go, oh, you know, I've been thinking about this stuff a lot in different contexts, and you guys happen to have a budget. And so that's kind of a quick, rough background. I can go into more detail. Part of my history will come up as we go into conversation, but it's kind of just the basic quick intro. Aside from how I got involved with the metacurrency project, about 9 or 10 years ago, I came up with, I had sort of a series of epiphanies that kind of ended with this, oh wow, you could change the way that communities regulate themselves if you can build a different set of communication tools. And it was this set of realizations about the way that humans regulate themselves, or did regulate themselves in small groups, and I think we still do, was primarily through reputation stuff, but that doesn't scale very well. And because it didn't scale very well, you know, you get to a 1 million person city, it's hard to keep track of what everybody's doing. And as populations expanded and as trade expanded, we started using different tools to help us still steer, to help us be able to continue interacting in those, you know, larger population contexts, and not get hurt consistently. And so we invented all kinds of other tools, including laws and courts and prisons and that sort of stuff. And I was in the middle of law school and that system was at bare minimum really inefficient, but it seemed to be quite broken to me. And I was looking for sort of other stuff and realized, oh, okay, so reputation had been kind of the glue that helped communities steer. It was a primary steering mechanism. At least it is when they're small. It doesn't scale very well. Hey, the internet is enabling reputation to scale in different ways. There were some issues there as well around, well, what about if the members of a community don't share norms, which was the primary problem that I had been trying to solve for a long time as a political philosopher. At global scale, we don't all agree about what's right, and I don't think we ever will. And so I was looking for regulatory tools that could allow us to steer amidst disagreement. And in my last year of law school, I sort of was running this thought experiment around, okay, could you do internet type, you know, rating system kind of stuff, but in a way that allows for people to steer amidst disagreement, and mapped out a basic outline of what that might look like, and was trying to figure out how to build that for a long time. Years later, I met the founders of the Metacurrency project, Arthur Brock and Eric Harris Braun, and we started chatting, and I realized, oh, you guys are trying to build the same thing, and your motivations are actually really similar in terms of what's driving you to try to create this stuff, in terms of giving communities tools that can enable them to steer. Yeah, so that's kind of the quick summary on who I am and how I got here. And so at that point, I basically was like, I'm going to, instead of trying to build my own thing, I'm going to come work with you guys and help you build your thing. Can I ask a bit about you? How did you wind up on this call? What brought your interest?
Well, the good thing about the internet is you can sometimes find things that you resonate with. And I just happened to be on Facebook a couple of weeks ago and saw the conversation group on a sidebar somewhere and decided, okay, let's see what this one's about, because I too have been looking to find people that I resonate with enough and who have the ability to join to create something new, which is a real talent and skill. And I saw so I've been in that conversation group for maybe only a week, and I saw your post, and that's how I ended up here.
Okay.
I did go out to the metacurrency site, but I could not find anything there that really described the organization. I did see that there were blog posts, but
yeah.
So my suggestion would be to have at least some type of summary there, so people have some idea.
Yeah.
Did I just not find it, or is it not there yet?
It's not there yet.
Okay.
And that's in part, well, yeah,
that's okay.
It's immature.
Yeah, and that's okay. So I'm just coming in from the cold, basically.
Sure.
So I live right now in North County, San Diego, and I am 57 years old. I've done a lot of different things. My first career was as a chiropractor, but quite frankly, and that was back in the 80s, before health maintenance organizations came in and before healthcare became one of the battlefields. But I also, too, found that system was not productive. A lot of different things happened as far as trying to reorient around a career. Maybe 25 years later, I decided that, well, I actually saw this in practice, that really business needed to change, that regardless of eating well, doing your exercise and your meditation and your self-help, the workplace was killing people. And the politics in the workplace and well, I won't go into that. So at a certain point, I decided that where the next linchpin for my place would be, because I was already oriented around business, was to get an MBA. I did that. That is also something that was lacking for me as far as what you could do with that. I am self-employed at the moment, and I've been self-employed actually most of my adult life. I don't know where to land right now. If the business card says basically I am a consultant for individuals and small businesses, I do something called heart center integration. Actually, I don't call it heart center because it's really not about the chakra itself, but my healing and consciousness and philosophy, if you want to call it that, moved into not just the human nervous system as a chiropractor, but then literally the nervous system as how we interact with each other. That there is an energetic, maybe you would just for now call it electromagnetic field effect. And as we are maturing into these new ways, we actually have to develop other senses and our own it's an embodied physiology that I think we're all looking for. This philosophy has to become embodied.
Mm.
And so I have that technique, but it's very difficult to do. And it takes a lot of work, unfortunately. And I have found also that it's the money. The money is the main hindrance. Actually, I did see that quite a while ago. And I had first, before I got my MBA, I thought about maybe going to financial services, but that was just even more. There was nowhere for me to move around there. So
Yeah.
this idea of value and how we exchange value, how we actually exchange energy, that we've physicalized right now still into dollars, um, is of utmost importance to me, not just philosophically, but I am having a lot of difficulty financially. And having the values that I have and not being able to do what I consider, even if I try to backpedal into what I've done in the past that had worked, it doesn't work for me anymore. And I have not found people who understand what we're really exchanging in the value because my experience is once that exchange is understood, the money kind of, or the resources, it doesn't necessarily have to be money, actually falls into place.
Yeah.
And I've had enough of that experience, but not enough for me to not be in stress every day.
Sure. Sure.
So I went out there. I don't know. I think that gives you some idea of where I'm coming from. So I'm very interested. I liked the way that you had said on the Facebook comments that it's just not one currency. I totally believe in that. The currency is a tool, and everybody has made it the structure that is served instead of understanding that it's to serve us. But I have found most people don't know themselves enough to even understand what they're valuing or why they're doing what they're doing. And the fear mechanism has been so amplified that even me having tools and decades of working with this, it still takes a lot of energy for me to get centered and to stay in my own coherent field during the day. So that's the only thing personally that's the best thing I can offer at the moment, is my own coherence, and knowing how difficult that is for me when I even have that kind of self-reflection. I'm really looking for a few, and you only need a few other people to go into the coherent field with to see where I fit, because I haven't found where I fit next. It's probably been, quite frankly, 20 years since I have felt like I have fit into somewhere and can contribute on a daily enough level. My contribution right now seems to be so sporadic, and at my age, I'm not married, I don't have children, so I don't have enough distraction or a place to have, a more whole feedback. So that's where I'm at right now.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. I think a good number of us on the metacurrency project have or have been in similar places. You know what I mean? Like when I'm going to try to not over intellectualize this and try to keep it in, like, rooted in actual experience. When you're sensitive to the work itself, the doing, and wanting that to be fulfilling and to feel like you are contributing in a significant way, and you sense that, hey, this isn't working. If I work in the existing sort of structures, if I go get a standard job in a corporation or whatever, there aren't alternate institutions that are really well developed for, there aren't easy like, oh, cool, I'll just check that box and go over here instead, and it works just fine. So there's a lot of, as you had said, kind of finding your own way, and it's stressful. Like on our team, we've had a lot of, I think, I'm trying to remember how Arthur frames it, but essentially like money has a shadow, and there's this grappling with if the contributions that you are making or are wanting to make aren't being valued by others in a way where, if money is one of our primary ways of communicating value, so it doesn't seem like, hey, this isn't getting valued, it creates problems in terms of just resources, and two, it creates problems in terms of or it can lead you to go, wait, and am I doing this right, or why is nobody seeing this?
Yeah, I really would question at this point if money is actually, I'm not quite sure if money actually expresses value properly.
Completely agree.
It's obvious that it doesn't, and so it's funny that the other woman that commented, I actually started writing a comment when you wanted to know what spoke out to me, and I was going to say, I'd really have to read the article again to give you, good feedback, but and I don't know when that would be, because the article was long and you touched so many different things.
Yeah.
That to give it
was a bit of a rant. Sorry.
No, you saw what I wrote. I was deeply touched by the comprehensiveness of it, and there were so many things that could have just been, obviously there's a good at least mini book in you just on that one post. And I do think people need to have it spelled out. I mean, quite frankly, you have given this a lot of thought, and that is your contribution. And I think for some of us who are being the parts in the organism that have been given that talent to take a big picture approach and go all the way down to the details, I'm not quite sure if our reward, and I don't necessarily need my reward to be what the culture values, but there has to be some kind of energetic flow, and that's the hard part to tap into for me right now. It keeps changing. I think I get a little stable for like a day or two, and then it shifts again. And but I do think I have been groomed for this, where my emphasis is to, I think the difference in the intellectualizing is that in this phase, it literally is, and I hate to just throw out this word, but it is the love that holds this together. And so until you can actually start running that frequency through your body more, the head just bats you around. I mean, it does not see a alternative. And so this becomes a very different experience of wholeness, I think. I was going somewhere else, but the comment the other woman made, I was going to comment that it's the value. I actually think the discussion actually has to be people looking at what they really value and what's really important to them. And that's just going to take a lot of self-reflection and a lot of work. And so how do you create a good enough platform that can hold that kind of creative tension, but actually is really pushing for self-development? Because quite frankly, the external exchange is an expression of what we ourselves can bring to the party. Our own internal development and how we're interacting then outside. And that's just that's that's not just philosophical, that's energetic. That's, that is actually what reality is, but you actually have to go deep to be able to not only verbalize it, but to continually keep going there when most of the momentum pulls you somewhere else. And I think that's what I really loved about your article, was that you were able to very coherently express all the different parts that need to be included. It's that it was obvious that you have found a certain balance. Balance is not the right word. Maybe cohesiveness is the better word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I don't know that my life is particularly balanced, but
right,
yes,
and I don't even know if, and I think that's an idea that probably needs to change too.
sure.
I think we were able, when you weren't playing in a big enough domain, balance, the illusion of balance was easier.
Yeah.
But I'm not even, everything actually is always moving. So the balance is anyway, I don't want to get,
Well,
and
no,
let's get back to metacurrency. I'm actually interested in metacurrency.
okay. Well, I think all those things do relate. If you have any, like, I've taken a couple of notes here of things to comment on or explore based on what you've said already. But do you have do you have like a question that jumps out about metacurrency, or?
I have just such a, I wouldn't even call it a brushstroke idea. From what I understood, it's going to be pushing into the value systems and multiple ways that we could give and receive. I don't even want to say exchange, because that idea of exchange is in the old domain also.
Yeah.
But how we flow energy in giving and receiving, I like to call it living love. Living love is, so that way it's actually, when you're living love, you are giving and receiving. It's actually one movement. It's not it's not a dualistic movement anymore. And that's maybe, so what I saw in metacurrency was understanding that it's not, that there are many pieces to the whole, and they all move in, there's interrelationships between all of it, and that it's tapping into those interrelationships deeper that we are going to be exploring now. And somehow I think we're just going to have to learn how to take care of each other better,
Yeah.
So I'd like to learn about metacurrency, so I'll stop there.
That sounds great. I will. So here's the notes that I've written down. Value, love, balance. Under exploring metacurrency specifically, I've got expressive capacity and beyond exchange. So those are that's kind of like, okay, those are things to dive into. But I think the fun way to start this would be with a chorus from a song from the 80s or early 90s. Baby, don't hurt me. Right. So let's go into what is love. And I grappled with this a bunch last year. I had spent some time away. Let me back up a little bit. So I was doing some consulting work, working mostly with publicly traded companies on explore how to be more innovative, how they could change the way that they operate as an organization so that they can be better at sensing opportunities and threats and actually taking action, which turns out to have a lot to do with, hey, how do you empower the individuals within your organization? How do you build trust? How do you make it so that they feel like, hey, if I go here, it's safe to go over there, and I'm not just going to get discarded if it doesn't work out. And so I was doing some of that, and I was doing some consulting work around organizational structure, corporate culture, more directly. Like some of those other projects were like a field trip. Hey, come to Silicon Valley, and we're going to introduce you to people and at the heads of all the tech companies, and what they're going to get is an introduction to drones and robots and artificial intelligence and big data and all the whiz bang tech stuff. And then what they learn about that stuff a bit, but what they also learn is, wow, all of these companies are thinking about how they organize themselves in radically different ways from how traditional organizations are doing it. And it's just because they have a different context that they're operating within. They're operating in the often the software world. Yeah, they're operating in a world where with an airplane, you don't get to constantly update the airplane. Hey, let's try this. Hey, let's try that. Hey, let's try this. With a website, you do. Mm-hmm. With an online video game, you can be doing 200 changes a day.
Right.
Where 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. If you sold video games 20 years ago, you put the thing in a box and it went onto a shelf. And so there was a hierarchy with some people who were pretty experienced making the last stamp of approval about what got to go in the box. But when that delivery model shifted to online and constant, the development model shifted as well, which led the organizational model to shift. The ability to be updating things constantly and trying like a little test with just 10 users made it so that the organizational structures shifted as well. The company who was able to, hey, you guys try whatever you want. If we find something that works, we'll try a bigger test. That leads to a much sort of flatter organization than when there's 2 years working on a project and we're going to ship it once. So I was doing some of that stuff, and then the other work had to do with things like, what's our purpose as an organization? We worked with a restaurant chain that has 100,000 people working in their restaurants, and their purpose, all that relevant to the activities of their people. Purpose, from my point of view, is a steering mechanism for an organization, and what it really does is it enables distributed steering. It enables a bunch of people to go, okay, that tells me where I'm trying to get to. I can come up with my own ways of trying to get there, and sort of a purpose along with some values makes it so that the people around you go, hey, Jim, what's going on there? That doesn't seem like it's aiming in the right direction. And it sort of enables this distributed steering to happen rather than a top-down steering in terms of the actions, right? It's still sort of top-down in terms of purpose and values. Hopefully that is stuff that kind of has grown up within the organization and resonates. But that was kind of where I was at. That work is pretty draining. It's fun, it's intellectually engaging, but it's pretty draining because you're basically playing psychologist to organization and all of the different people who feel threatened by change, and you're trying to navigate all of that. And I was also trying to work on this internet stuff with the Metacurrency project and other folks. And I was having a hard time doing both. And I decided to set up a small Airbnb, and I stepped away from the consulting stuff. So I'm taking a deeper dive into political philosophy and into how natural systems kind of operate, how natural ecosystems function. And it was like, all right, I'm going to go surfing, and I'm going to go kite surfing, and I'm going to think, and I'm going to write, and I'm going to read, and I just kind of took some time. And I basically went from, somewhat highfalutin consultant to maid. Honestly, right? Like my job became to turn over the beds in my house for guests, and eventually we got that system dialed enough to the point where I have a housekeeper. But for a while, I became a maid, and that
it's honorable work, Matthew.
I have no problems with it. It was actually probably the best thing.
That too. You don't have to anyway. Yeah, it's honorable work.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It is. The way that our culture looks at it, it's not the prestigious work, right? And dominantly, it's not high prestige, but it was actually much healthier work for me. Mm-hmm. There was a structure, and as you would kind of put it, an embodiedness to that work that got me moving right away every day. and it was like, cool, we got that done, and now let's go on to this. And as somebody who's been self-employed a lot in your life, and I've been self-employed a lot in my life, there's a dark side to self-employment, which is if you don't have enough structure, it can become very easy to go through emotional roller coasters, or wander, or there's a
I agree.
yeah, there's
I agree.
yeah, there's a complexity there that from the outside people wouldn't necessarily, people who haven't lived through that would think, oh, what freedom. And you're like, well, there's yes, and the last year, and I ended up, as a result of giving myself the space to do a lot of that a lot of that exploration, I got a chance to, as you had kind of seen in this piece, dive into some things pretty deeply and ask, is that really true? And if so, why? And to kind of do that over and over again, diving down the rabbit hole. And one of the pieces that felt like it became most for me was kind of figuring out what I'm going to try to go into this without getting too detailed. What love sort of is, and this is kind of related to what spirituality can be thought of as, and both of them relate to connectedness, right? To an awareness of the ways in which we are connected, and to a kind of a coming together. So if we feel like we are separate, there's a you and there's a me. There's a love has to do with sort of an awareness of the flows, of the interconnectedness between us, but also between kind of like everything, life. And you had spoken a little bit about going beyond exchange, and I've done a lot of work over. Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Okay. You had spoken about beyond exchange, and a lot of my focus over the last year has to do with identity, and specifically identity as it can be used in communities. So I've focused on distributed identity systems on the internet. Right now, the way we do identity on the internet is it's largely passwords. How does that email service know that it's you again? Well, mm-hmm. you know the username and the password, and because you're able to enter both of those things, they go, okay, it's the same person, right? And so they give you access to the stuff that you had before. That's not a super functional system. We all recognize there's some weaknesses there, and so some of us are working on trying to build infrastructure that enables that to work a little better. There's some other systems, but that's the password stuff is probably the main one that most people are focused on or make use of regularly. That identity exploration, so from that point of view, I was diving into the philosophy behind identity, and in terms of two sides. One, identity from the perspective of how do I perceive myself? Distinguish what is me from what is not me. And then two, identity in terms of how do others perceive me? How are they able to communicate about me, and how does that help them steer? Right? So if somebody has interacted with me in the past and they invited me hunting, and it turns out I'm very dangerous as a hunter, I'm not a good person to invite. They remember next time, hey, maybe we don't invite Matt, and they might tell their friends about that, right? They might say, hey, don't invite that guy hunting. Nice guy, you might want to go and have a barbecue with him, but don't put a gun in his hand. Um, and they are able to benefit from the previous experience that they have had with me. And others are able to benefit from that experience as well because of the information that gets communicated, right? Hey, he's not a good hunter. And that person, if they're trying to decide who to invite to hunt, they're like, well, maybe not Matt, even though they've never interacted with me. So that's part of the way that helps a community to steer. And then you get into questions of, you know, is that judgment biased? And we have we've kind of got mechanisms for grappling with all that. It's not, none of it's perfect, but they're all sort of steering mechanisms. But on the other side, not the how does a community use identity or identities to help steer, but on the internal side, how do I perceive of who I am, or what are the boundaries of, you know, me, of my own identity? On that side, that's fluid too, right? And it's fluid not just in a like, what do I think of myself as, but it's fluid in a, you know, physical. You had talked earlier about embodied. If when I first get in a car and I'm first trying to drive a car, the car feels like it is not a part of me, right? I'm like, the first time I ever drove a car, okay, turn, oh, you know. But at this point, after decades of driving, the car feels like it's a part of me, and I treat it as if it's a part of me. I want to go that way, and I instinctively, you know, pull the wheel. And that just has to do with, over time, and enough experience with it, my brain has built up neural connections and, you know, little pathways where, you know, I went like this and the car moved and it was like, yep, that one works. And eventually over time that gets put on autopilot to a point where I don't have to think, go over there, so I need to move the hand to here and then move it to here, and then, you know, it shortcuts all of that. It builds up these shortcuts. And to that extent, we begin to part of ourselves. All that as a part of ourselves, or the fork, et cetera, et cetera. So in a physical way, our sense of self expands. I think the same is true in terms of relationships. It's not that we cease to be an entity that is separate from that, but we also begin to perceive ourselves as or treat it as if there's a we here, me and the car, or me and yeah, I can go into that more, but I feel like it's a kind of continued rant, and I'd like to kind of take a moment and breathe and hear if you have any thoughts or responses to that.
Well, if I grok where the big picture of it is, it started with like the many dimensions of love and the many expressions that love can take. In my own experience of, you know, the feeling sense of all that, and feeling how what those interrelationships are, and what the movement between the relationships are, I was very thankful last year to read some of David Bohm's work. Are you familiar with David Bohm, the physicist?
No.
He's got a very helpful orientation around wholeness. And he did quite a few, made very good distinctions between fragmentation and wholeness. And fragmentation actually has broadly two aspects, where you're trying to connect something closer together that needs to be further apart, or where you've separated something that actually is closer together. And so when you actually start looking maybe in terms of like a puzzle, although this is not something that's static, this is always moving, that's where the exchange thing has to kind of change in how we relate to it, because it's a multi-dynamic movement. And so wholeness is a way I actually, when you actually feel into it, better describes what love is, because then it allows the relationships to be where they need to be in the moment and to change as they need to change. And it's where you start actually respecting that energy, because it's so you're not identifying with what we've been trained as to see ourselves as, or what's of value, but you actually start valuing um, the movement of the energy to allow it to keep changing. And when it goes into more of this wholeness, when you see it in this framework of wholeness, you actually feel the love precipitating very differently. It, so that's, if there was, I didn't do that very well. Maybe I'll think about it after I hear this again and go, okay, because I actually do think a good definition of love is wholeness. And so what that allows it to do is it trickles down through whatever domain you're in. So if people are at one level, love is still there. It's just expressed in a certain type of relationship. And then as we keep expanding, it gets expressed in more ways. And like that, in a sense, it was, I sensed from that article that you wrote, the amount of energy, and love is energy, that you have spent making these distinctions and seeing where the connecting pieces are. So I think like that's a very good expression of love, is looking at the interrelationships and how they can best serve you and serve other people. And there's actually not a win or lose in that kind of thing, but it is very difficult because it keeps moving, and there's not a whole lot of security in it, and there is a lot of uncertainty. And one minute you think the relationship is going to go this way, and it disappears. And I think for me the hardest thing is to realize that okay, I'm only seeing 99% of what's here, literally.
Yeah.
And to be able to feel into enough to know that just because I don't see what's next, I can trust that something else will emerge. The other thing, if you're not familiar with David Bohm's work, that I'd like to add is he has a beautiful discussion on dialogue. And I'll send you, I like listening to podcasts. This is an old podcast with, I think gentleman was Michael Toms. I'm not quite sure. I'll send you the link. Somebody posted it on YouTube earlier this year. And David Bohm had a very nice idea about dialogue, where basically you come together with no agenda. Are you familiar with this?
No.
Okay. You suspend belief, and you, in a sense, discuss things, not being over-identified with anything that's being said, to actually allow something new to emerge. And I think that that's what we're doing. And when you look at what, the digital technologies allowed us to do, like you said, real-time iterations to see what works and to keep uploading to new things. This is the kind of conversations that we can have too, but you do have to step back. The digital landscape is so rich. It allows us to do that. And actually, our communication, no pun intended, landscape allows us to do that too, but we're using our own nervous system instead of the keyboard, to do that. So I think I'll send you those series of discussions with David Bohm, because he beautifully articulates wholeness and dialogue, and that's what metacurrency is. Metacurrency is physicalizing that expression of our humanness, consciousness. Metacurrency is finding all those different interconnections and where the value chain is, and how we can best serve the value chain and best be served by the value chain.
Yeah, it's wow, so much there. Okay, so I want to bookmark a couple of things. One, I want to talk about expressive capacity, just building off of the last point that you made around metacurrency and and value chain and all that. So expressive capacity. And then the other thing I want to talk about David Bohm and the discussion on dialogue, and him as a physicist in particular. I've been, this last few days, I've been focused a lot on physics. There was a gentleman named Paul Burrill who gave a speech at Stanford in 2009. And Arthur Brock, one of the founders of the Metacurrency Project, had shared a little link to this talk, and I went and watched it and was like, oh, interesting. The talk was called Rethinking Time in Distributed Systems, and it was really a challenge to computer scientists. He was basically going, hey, computer scientists, you've been building all these really complicated computer systems on a foundation of a misunderstanding of time.
Mm-hmm.
Einstein had figured out some stuff about time 100 years ago, and you guys have ignored him. And you've ignored him because you think that it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter, you know, newsflash. And this is why you're having some serious problems in distributed systems. And to sort of like unpack that word, distributed systems is in the computer world, that's like, hey, there's my computer acting with your computer and this computer way over there, and there's a bunch of them and they're all communicating with one another, right? And so you can think of it as a network or an ecosystem of computers. The internet is obviously a distributed system, so we'll put it that way. I was fortunate enough that Paul came over, so I had sort of shared his article or his talk, and it kind of added some links to some places that I thought were particularly poignant, and I had sort of said, hey, this fits with how the metacurrency project, how we think about distributed systems, and that's why we're trying to build a different sort of computer network. Basically, we are trying to create a new way of doing computation as well as computer networking. For us, it wasn't driven by physics, you know, it was driven by a desire to create these tools, and we ended up working backwards and realizing, oh shoot, you got to do things in these different ways in order to get that to work. Okay, so sort of that little piece as background. I've been thinking a lot about physics, and I've also been sort of building on the conversation we had just had about two entities recognizing or interacting with one another and then being sort of becoming there being another entity that is both of them together. I don't think that they lose their separateness. I think that they can each still operate in a way that is disjointed from one another. That's not to say that they aren't changed by the interaction. They may be changed by that interaction. They almost certainly are. But that there's also this way in which they dance together, and you can think of that as another entity. So you can, you know, we see this it's most easy for me to visualize this in terms of an organization. Hey, there's me, but then if I'm working inside of this company, 5 other people, you know, each of them is a person too, but together we're a different thing, right? Together we are this company, and the world often is not, they may not interact with each of us individually at all. They may not even know that we're there. They're only, you know, this other business is just buying, you know, plumber's pipe or something that we are making. And all they're aware of, the only thing that they're sensitive to is how we operate as an organization. Now, each of us as individuals can influence that, but that's not, they're not necessarily aware of that. So the weird thing here is the way in which we are connected with one another and we are still separate. And so the wholeness concept, I totally agree with. How do I frame this? There's a term that I started to use over the last year and a half, and I don't know if I coined it or if somebody else has coined it, or but it's not a new concept. It's just that I'm using called coherence layers. And mean by coherence layer is this entity, basically, that has some organized flows in it, there's a coherence to it, and it seems like it is separate from the world around it. Like me, I seem like I'm separate from the world around me, and yet at the same time, there's, if I put my hand on a cold desk, there's going to be flows of temperature, of heat going back and forth. There will be there's chemical reactions, there's physical interactions, etc. So there's a way in which I am communicating with the world around me. So I am connected to the world around me. So I use the term coherence layer because there is an orderliness to that layer, and yet at the same, so there's a thing that seems like it's separate from the world around it, and there's also a connectedness, and they're both true. Like the really hard thing for me to grapple with last year eventually led me to leave the religion that I was raised in, oddly enough, was this insight around, okay, things are connected and they are somewhat separate as well. Like those are both both of those things are true, and they're just ways of perceiving, but there's a way in which, I pick up the mouse and then I let go of the mouse and it leaves my hand. Like, it is not me. There's a difference between us, and there's still an interaction between us.
I get it.
Cool. Okay, so the summary that I came up with was, in order to create community, and I think this kind of touches on some of the dialogue stuff and that you were maybe diving into with David Bohm. In order to create community, we need communication. Meaning, as soon as and it turns out that it's not just in order to create community, you need communication. As soon as you get communication, you create community. There's an interaction between two entities. That interaction ends up creating a new layer. You can perceive it as that includes these entities and the relationship between them. You get the emergence of a new coherence layer through that communication. There is a communing. They came together. What the shape of that is will be determined by the that occur. But as soon as you have interaction, you have communication, which gives you community. And over the last week or so, Paul Burrill, the guy who had given that talk, he found me on Twitter, and we ended up connecting, and he came over and we did dinner and had a really fun discussion about, what the cutting edge of this is at the moment in terms of trying to get an understanding of how time works and what it is. And I'm most, deeply exploring at the moment and prior to that conversation is, hey, it's not just time and it's not just space. It's what's the nature of that interaction. What is the perspective that is perceiving of time? Is it the perspective of this individual? Is it the perspective of this individual? Is it the perspective of the collective dance between the two of them? That gets really abstract very quickly, but yeah, but it kind of,
yeah, I get it.
Okay.
Especially having been a healer, my first career as a chiropractor, as a healer, you actually do go into a different time to heal. You don't stay in present time because that holds the illness there. So you actually open up space and time to allow that movement to change. I mean, that's the perception of it. Mm-hmm. For both the quote unquote physical beings. So yeah, it's all of that, and that's what takes the nervous system to develop those multiple interconnectivities to be able to hold all of that, because it's not just a linear thing. It's a multi-relational experience, I actually see us as the only way I can get through a day. But I've also had this experience before I ever had to intellectualize it, is that we are these energetic entities that are walking through these type of experiences. And so it's seeing all the different relationships between it is what gives us the experiences. And so
Yeah.
when you're able to hold the relevancy of, you still need linear time, so we could meet today at 9:30 to have this conversation.
Sure.
And yet through this conversation, at least the coherence in what I feel in the field is we've gone into so many different ways. Who knows what it will sound like if it was played back, but
Yeah.
the love and coherence and resonance I have felt, well, this was fun. I'm actually like, and unfortunately, if I had all the structure that most people have, I wouldn't have been able to have the freedom to have this nice experience with you today.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I did use a word in my discussion with Paul that he said, "Oh, you should be careful about using that word," because I think in the physics community, this word is a red flag that you should just write somebody off. And I think that actually may also, my thought over the last couple of days is, oh, this may be why they haven't been able to find the answer they're looking for.
Consciousness?
Right. Bing, 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 bing. If we're speaking about perspective, right, and you have the two entities and they start dancing together, and that new coherence layer is something that other entities can interact with, and it is sensitive to some things and not sensitive to others. And maybe it's not, that mutual coherence layer is not sensitive to some of the things that each of these is. It is a consciousness, and not in a hippy-dippy way, but in a, it senses and interacts. And yes, it has these parts, but you can think of it as a consciousness. And so I'm trying to map out how to write that that really goes into the root and with enough detail and depth that it doesn't get written off by that community. We'll see. I don't know.
Well, that's the big, just within that community, they like to use that as the creative tension point. So there's lots of physicists who talk of consciousness, but there's they get the backlash from the other people who don't like it. So I wouldn't, if that's the word you want to use, I wouldn't modify your journey to those.
I think it's,
they have enough other people.
But I'll try to be clear about it.
Yeah, they have enough other people to get mad about for using the word consciousness. I mean, that's the big hoo-ha in the physics community. Anyway.
Okay, that's good to know. I didn't know. I'm not deeply enmeshed in that community, right? My explorations there have been.
That's just their big argument. They just don't like that word.
Because
it's used well, and it's defined differently by different people, and so. But there obviously. Everybody knows that there is something that witnesses itself as itself. So there's lots of different words for whatever that ever-changing identity is. But so I was hoping we could wrap up soon. Do you want to? This has been a wonderful get to know you since nobody else was here. It was wonderful. But
I'm sure it would have been wonderful if other people were here too.
I would love to know just more about the metacurrency.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be doing these once every couple of weeks, basically the first and third. I think it's normally going to be Saturday of each month. But if there are some blog posts on the metacurrency blog.
Okay.
And I've got some blog posts on my blog as well, which is matthewschutte.com. MatthewSchutte. And that's matthewschutte.com. The one thing I will just kind of, and I think this was made clear in the article, but it touched on something that you had said a minute ago, and I had bookmarked it, and that's expressive capacity. Project, we are not trying to outline, the structure of the conversation or to try to map the world in some sort of static way, because as you had described, that's not how we think it works. It's these flows that are changing and are dynamic and are interacting and are shifting as a result. And so the way that we think about the metacurrency project and the tools that we're building, it's not just digital like software tools, though that's a big key part. It's also processes and ways that humans can structure a conversation, that kind of stuff. But the internet tools are a big component of what we're trying to create. The way we think about that is that if we build the right tools, they can enable a new expressive capacity. We were describing this as an expressive capacity. Then we started talking about it as a receptive capacity, and now we describe it as a grammatical capacity. That's a little bit of a conversation, but the gist of it is, hey, if I have some new way of sending a signal, that's an expressive capacity. If you have a new way of receiving a signal, or you can have that signal reach you and can go, oh, I now perceive this as whatever. That's receptive capacity. And if two entities, we'll describe them as if they're separate, gain an ability to send and to receive, you have a grammar that starts to emerge. You have the ability to have a new form of communication. The way we think about that is, like a simple example would be, when if you only have spoken word, we can share information in certain ways. If you all of a sudden invent writing, and somebody's able to leave a mark on something, and then someone else is able to look at that mark and interpret it, well, one had the ability to express, the other has the ability to receive, and if those are in alignment, like I'm able to express and you're able to receive, we have the emergence of this new expressive capacity. We can now communicate ideas over long distance or over a long period of time. I could write something down and then hundreds to experience that idea, whereas when it was limited to verbal communication, it's lost as soon as the sound waves are gone. Or the oral tradition, changes the verbal, the telephone game, the verbal stuff, changing it enough that it shifts. And we see the development of this tool set as kind of like that, as enabling a different expressive capacity. And so that's what we're trying to build, is a set of tools and processes that enable communication of a different sort. And we can probably dive into that more another day, I guess.
Okay. Well, thank you for doing this. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for coming.
I'll
if I show up and there's nobody here, it doesn't really work.
Well, that's because we're still limited by time and space in that perspective, but
yeah.
I'll friend you on Facebook, and I'll send you the links. I actually have sent them to several people. I'll send you the links to all of these recent uploaded David Bohm discussions. I hope you like listening to podcasts, because they're really, the interviewer is very good, and there's probably at least a good 5 or 6 hours. But David Bohm's thought process, he's just such a good thinker, and he's coherent enough in his own thinking. He actually talks about coherence quite a bit. So I think you'll enjoy him. And we'll just see you again on Facebook and then go from there. How's that?
That sounds great. And I'll try to wrap with one last thing, which is gaining an understanding of the metacurrency project and how it's organized. It's basically a handful of folks at the moment who are, most of us have subsidized our lives in other ways, so we're not a company. And it's not that we won't become something that is a bit more organized, but right now it's
you're a virtual group.
Yep, we do it as a side project, pretty much. Though it's pretty central to most of our lives. And we are in the middle of trying to define protocols for inclusion and exclusion, meaning go from having never heard of us to hearing about us to being able to find out how to get involved and all yada, like, and deeper ways of participating. And that does not exist yet, and it's on our to-do list. So you are absolutely right in that it is not clear how to participate or what next steps to take, and we're trying to map that out. I'm actually the coherence holder for trying to map that out, and I've been kind of buried in doing other work as of late. So it's something we're trying to get out in the next month or so.
Well, I'd love to have, we could be offline, some conversations. I have the time right now, and it seemed like we were of good service to each other and value. So thank you.
Francine, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your weekend.
See you on the flip side.
Definitely. Bye.
Bye.